Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session with the Psych Rehab Advanced Practice of BC. We're so happy to have you with us. We're really excited for today's session. It promises to be fantastic. We're looking at today becoming a radical advocate for self-determination, the revolutionary perspective within the PSR recovery movement. So hopefully that's what you're here for today. If by any chance it's not, I encourage you to stay because it's going to be a great session. Just a reminder of who you're connecting through today. This is the Advanced Practice team. My name is Matthew Lang. I'm the coordinator for the AP. And below my picture there, you'll see Dr. Regina Casey, who is the manager of the Advanced Practice as well as the coordinator for the Psychosocial Rehab Post-Degree Diploma Program at Douglas College. Anybody who's been with us before knows that Dr. Casey is frequently on with us and introduces the day. She's unable to be with us today because she's hosting a, let's call it a simultaneous webinar webcast with the Mental Health Commission of Canada on their newly released recovery guidelines. So if you're here today for the Radical Self-Determination Advocacy Workshop, maybe then you can scoot over to the Mental Health Commission of Canada website later and look at their archived session on the recovery guidelines as hosted by Dr. Casey. Dr. John Higginbottom is the founder of the PSR programs at Douglas College, through whom we are hosted, as well as the founder of the Advanced Practice and really one of the strong guiding lights in psychosocial rehab and the recovery movement in BC. And Jordan Clark provides information and technology support for the Advanced Practice, so we're very grateful to Jordan. In case this is your first time with us, just a quick context about the AP. We're funded by the Ministry of Health and intending to provide leadership, education, and guidance to the mental health field in order to help develop and put effective, evidence-based psychosocial rehab practices into place. And we've done that through a variety of means, but mostly through the online wide world of internet connection through our free advanced practice webinars that you're accessing today. We do want to say a very strong and emphatic thanks to all the instructors and hosts who have lent their time, their expertise, and their passion to these sessions, and encourage you to go back and review our archived webinars, all available at the website psyrehab.ca/workshops. So what are we intending here? We're intending to support both clinicians and managers responsible for providing PSR services by transferring evidence-based knowledge, providing expert clinical consultation, training and education events, website resources, and to support the Provincial Advisory Committee and the PSR Community of Practice. Those are oversight bodies that help develop the mandate of the Advanced Practice as well as the forthcoming PSR BC Service Framework. Just a quick reminder that we really value everyone's input and particularly in your reflective evaluations. So thank you for providing the feedback that you have been doing so after each session, and we'd really ask that if you can, once the survey with your certificate of participation comes out, it will also include a link to that evaluation survey, and we just ask if you can participate and help us grow and help us improve. One quick promotion that I wanted to make before we move into today's session is that the Psychosocial Rehab Canada National Conference is taking place in June. From the 20th to the 22nd in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So I'm seeing people checking in from Toronto and Dauphin, Manitoba, which is fantastic. Not that Dauphin is particularly close to Thunder Bay, but I guess it's closer than we are here today in Vancouver. So for folks who are interested in learning more and connecting to a really vibrant and rich recovery community, this is the place to do it each year. So we'd encourage you to check out the website. The link is there. innovative4 PSR 2016/conference.htm. And that'll take you to the conference registration page and all the information about the fantastic keynote speakers, including Pat Deegan, Dr. Whitney, Karen Baker, and Psychosocial Rehab Canada is going to be doing a special session on the recently published PSR competencies for Canadian recovery-oriented practitioners, as well as the forthcoming Psychosocial Rehab Practitioner Registry, which will be launched at this year's conference. Tracy is saying hello from Thunder Bay. Come to the conference here. Absolutely. Let's all go. Okay, so that's going to bring us to our session for the day. A fantastic, passionate individual and a former dear colleague of mine, Jennifer Cusick, who is the founder of Luminate Wellness, Jen is a certified psychiatric rehab practitioner, as well as an advanced level RAP facilitator, and has been working in the mental health area for the last 20 years. During that time, she's been a relentless force for innovation, and I can attest to that personally. She sees sparks, programs, and projects with the potential to serve humanity in bright new ways and tends to them until they catch fire, transforming their surroundings. Jen has her own wellness business called Luminate Wellness, which you see the link to there. I encourage you to check that out after today's session for a variety of services and really fantastic information. In 2003, Jen introduced the Copeland Center's revolutionary wellness recovery and action plan as advocated for the agency's support until the model was integrated into all 14 communities within the Fraser Health Authority. And for those from out of province, BC is divided jurisdictionally into health authorities where administration is conducted, and Fraser is a very, very large and very populous health authority in the sort of southwest corner of the province. Luminate Wellness specializes in wellness recovery action plan, workplace wellness programs, as well as appreciative inquiry. It integrates the philosophy of strength-based approach in all its services. So we're so happy to have Jen with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the lecture over to her.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Um, I am Jen, and thank you for that great introduction. I am used to facilitating groups in front of live groups of people, so this is new for me, and I really want to make this as interactive as we can in this format. So please, if you have any comments or any questions or anything you want to say to contribute to the conversation, please do. Please just write it right in that chat, and I want to hear from you. So, yeah, so it's my goal to make this platform as interactive as possible. So, um, this topic is very near and dear to my heart. I worked for many years. I came from, I worked in the peer support sector of mental health, and I managed a peer support program for about 14 years, and it was awesome. It was a fantastic experience. And I learned so much during my time there, and I'm very excited to be able to share some of that with you today. Um, Oh, and I see Rebecca. Rebecca's on there. First of all, before I start, I'd love to know where everyone's from. Can you just type in the comment section? I just would like to know Dawson, Langley. There's people from Langley, Terrace, Hell River, Toronto, Cranbrook, Manitoba, Ontario, Salmon Arm, Kamloops. Wow, North Van. There's Wendy, Cranbrook. Wow, this is great. Oh, and Helen from the United States. Um, Great. Thank you, everybody. I feel like I know you a little bit more now. Okay, so let's start. So what we're going to cover today, I, it's interesting. When I was in school, I disliked history and studying history. And it was like, why do we need to know this? That kind of feeling. And I don't know if you feel the same, if you had that kind of experience with history when you were younger. Now I love history, and I feel like it's so important to um, know kind of where we came from, to understand where we are today, and to know where we want to go for the future. So I included a little bit about the history of the recovery movement and similar social movements like that have brought us to the place that we're at today. And from there, I want to talk a little bit about worldview and how the way we see the world affects our interaction with the world, and how that affects how we choose to serve people. And then we're going to talk about what is self determination. What does that even mean? It's a word that's thrown around a lot. What does that look like? And then I'm going to talk about how do we become a radical advocate for self determination? How do we support people in their journeys of self determination? Because sometimes we accidentally With we have the best intentions, but we can actually steal from someone's self determination. So we want to talk about that, how we can create environments where people feel free to move towards what they need and want for their lives. Sorry, while I take a sip of my tea. Okay, so what is a social movement? So, a social movement is a group of people working together to advance their shared political, social, or artistic ideas. So, a political group, party, faction, wing, lobby, camp. Can anyone type in the box what is a social movement that you really resonate with? Can I hear? Can I hear someone? Let's see, people are typing LGBTQIA. Thank you. Peer support, RAP, recovery movement, environmental causes, um, mental illness recovery, lots of recovery. Thank you. That's great. So, reducing poverty. Thank you. I actually had a chance to see a video yesterday on, it came across my news feed on Facebook, and it was a TED Talk, and it was a little 3-minute video on how to create a movement. And if you do a little search for it, it's really fantastic. It's a guy talking about how a movement starts. So it starts with this guy who's standing on a hill and he starts doing this weird dance. So he's like kind of initiating the movement and looks really weird while he's doing it, obviously. And then all of a sudden, another person comes and joins him and starts dancing. And that person is so important in starting the movement. Oh, that's the link. Oh, okay, that's awesome. So he is also very important in starting the movement because once people start joining in, then it's not just one person looking weird dancing on a hill, you know? So then another person joins in, and then slowly, as there's a group of people that are motivated by the same thing, other people start joining in. So the power comes, I mean, certainly the first person to start something starts the movement. It doesn't become a movement until everyone else starts joining in to the same cause. And I thought that was like just a fantastic little video on movements. Um, okay, so famous movements and causes. So obviously the civil rights movement is huge in our history. The women's suffrage movement, when women gathered to get the right to vote, the labor movement, the whole union issue, LGBTQ social movements, and I know there's more letters now. I missed those. I apologize. The Occupy movement, which was it didn't last a long time, but it was a few years ago, and that was great for those of us who had the opportunity to be involved in that. Um, and then, of course, when I want to talk about is the recovery movement. Um, yeah, so there, I wanted to kind of go back in history and talk a little bit about what came before what we know now as the recovery movement, or what's sometimes referred to as the consumer survivor movement. So, peer support has championed the message and the process of recovery over the century, but only recently has its message been recognized in the mental health system. So, the first one is the that I wanted to highlight. There's more than this. I just did kind of like a short version for the sake of time. So in 19, oh no, not 19, 1854 in London, there was an association that started called the Alleged Lunatics Friend Society, which is a horrific name for today, but at the time, that's what they chose. And basically, it was started by a guy named John Percival, and he was actually the son of the prime minister at the time and spent some time in an institution. And we can only imagine that it was very horrific in 1854. So he had a horrible experience in the institution that he was receiving support. So he gathered a group of people who also received, horrific treatment to start changing the laws around mental health. And this was, of course, in London. So it was one of the earliest known um, records of peer support. So then in the early 1900s, there was something called the mental hygiene movement. And the founder of this movement was named Clifford Whittingham Beers. And he had a suicide attempt after he finished university and ended up in an institution and again had was really mistreated in this institution. So after he got out, he wrote a book, um, and it's called A Mind That Found Itself. So he also um, he also gathered a group of people and started a movement, and it was in the United States, and it still actually exists. And it was actually this movement eventually has become Mental Health America, which is a pretty massive. It's kind of similar to CMHA in the U.S. So that had a really significant impact in the movement today. One that's not on there is the development of Fountain House, which is the first clubhouse, and that was started in 1949, and that was one of the first um, consumer-run clubhouses, and it also had, and that was in New York City, and that had significant impact in the movement. And then the civil rights movement um, actually was a bit of a catalyst for what we know of as the consumer survivor movement. Um, at that point in time in history, there was quite a few movements all happening at the same time. So this was in the 60s. So there was also, there was the civil rights movement, but there was also all the stuff around Vietnam and all those other movements happening at the time. So the person who kind of started that movement, her name is Judy Chamberlain. And if you don't know of her, I encourage you to do a little bit of research and studying her. She had, again, a similar story where she ended up in, um, uh, receiving support that wasn't helpful, and then wanted to fight for change and mental health reform. She wrote a book that is still a famous book in the movement called On Our Own, Patient-Controlled Alternatives to the Mental Health System. And she passed away in 2010, but she had really significant impact in the recovery movement today. And that movement coined the phrase, nothing about us without us. And I don't know if you've heard that before, but it has significant importance in the movement. The idea that if something is going to be implemented, we need to have a voice. We need to have a say in what happens. And then even though PSR isn't part of the recovery movement, it certainly comes together. There's similarities. So the PSR movement, I'm not going to talk too much about that because this is a PSR call, so you probably know what it is. And then, a lot of the history tends to take place in the United States, and I'm quite familiar with some of what happens in the United States even today. And I think it's partly because I would say, and I realize I'm a little biased because I live in Canada, but I feel like in Canada we generally have pretty good care. So a lot of times, at least now, people receive fairly good care. There's certainly lots of room for movement and growth, but it's generally people are treated fairly well. In the United States, there was less regulation, and there was lots of things that happened that were not quite as good. So, unfortunately, a lot of the movements, a lot of the revolutions come out of the United States, not as much in Canada because you kind of have to be really, um, you know, anger kind of fuels a movement, and sometimes as Canadians, I'm married to an American, so I can kind of talk about the differences. But Americans tend to be just a little bit more vocal about change than we are in Canada. We tend to sit back a little bit more. So there's a lot more that happened in the United States. But I discovered that there was a movement in Toronto, and actually, it's not on here. I have my notes here. There was a movement called the Mental Patients Association, and that started in Vancouver actually, and that was in the 70s. So that was um, earlier on. And there is a website, and oh shoot, I forget what the website is. It's do you know? You can find it. Okay. So it's still around, and I actually had the opportunity yesterday to meet someone who was a part of that movement in the time. So he shared a little bit of information about it with me. And they did a lot of radical work back in the day. And I believe it still exists today too. So then also in 1993, the Mad Pride movement started in Toronto. So I love hearing about little bits of things that happen within Canada. Um, and that was, again, a push to change the language around how we speak about people who struggle with mental health issues, reclaim language, and educate the public on mental health issues. And they actually chose to use the word mad and reclaim that word from, how it tends to be talked about in public. So they were like, we're proud of that. So that was kind of the story there. Um, and then 1997, Mary Ellen Copeland conducts a study that becomes RAP. And of course, this is near and dear to my heart because I'm very involved in RAP. And I just feel, yeah, like she had a pretty significant impact in where we are today. If I had more time, I'd tell you the story about how that came about, but it is a fascinating story. And if you want to check it out, her website is mentalhealthrecovery.com, or there's also the Copeland Center, copelandcenter.com. Um, there we go. So if you want to do some more studying and looking up different people who had a significant impact in this movement, here are some people. I mentioned Mary Ellen Copeland already. I mentioned Judy Chamberlain. Again, I watched a video just yesterday of her speaking, and very, very moving and very profound. She had a really huge impact on us. Everyone knows who Pat Deegan is, hopefully. If you don't, do some research around her. She's amazing. Her story is she lived in uh, some kind of a facility for many years, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and was told basically she'd never do anything. And she struggled for a while to even get out of the house. And this is actually kind of relates to the topic today. So um, there was some staff in the group home who would just invite her. They didn't pressure her. They didn't say, you need to do this for your health. They just every day would say, hey, we're going out. Do you want to come? And she would always, very often say no. She very rarely said no, said yes. She just always wanted to stay home. And eventually they kept asking, and that's what I find so awesome is they didn't stop asking, and they didn't also pressure her. So they just kept putting out the invitation, and eventually she said yes, and then she started to get involved, and then she got to a place where she is now, which is it was a long journey. So now she went back to school. She's a psychologist, and she runs an organization called Common Ground, and their mission is to change the way people receive services. So to be a bridge between the peers and the mental health system. And then Sherry Mead also has a similar story. She received care, and it wasn't a good thing for her at the time. I don't know how old she is now. She's in her 50s, I think. Um, and she went back to school and ended up starting something called intentional peer support. And it is a peer support program. I believe that her program has relevance anywhere. It's amazing. She does really great work. Since in the last I guess 10 years, she has been diagnosed with Parkinson's. So she's not as involved anymore, but her organization is still out there doing great work. And yeah, there's some great people involved. Dan Fisher, he is the executive director of the National Empowerment Center, and they are a organization in the US that they do a lot of advocacy work. I know Dan actually was involved in advocacy at the in Washington, so he's very involved. He as well diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was in med school, and was able to complete his degree. And he is, I think he's a psychologist. I'm not sure if he's a psychologist or psychiatrist, but he's, I think it's a psychologist. So he does great things. Pat Capone is Canadian, and I don't know as much about Pat, but I know she just recently spoke at the PSAC conference in on Toronto recently. She has written a book. Matthew, I don't know if you could find out, Google her and put her link up there. I'm not sure what the book is called, but it's significant for Canada. She's had a significant impact. Um, Anyone else that I missed that you think should be mentioned up here? Does anyone know of anyone else? Wendy's typing. Wendy knows. Wendy is involved in PSAC. Oh, she. Thank you, Wendy. Okay. Okay, so then I want to talk about the Courtney Harding study, and it's a longitudinal study. Has anyone heard about Courtney Harding? Has anyone heard of her before? A few people are typing. Helen has. Okay. Oh, thank you, Matthew or Matt. um, okay, so she held a study in 1987, and it's a fascinating study, and I think it's really important for all of us to be aware of this. So I'm gonna grab my other notes here. So it was a 32-year longitudinal study, and she studied people who had severe schizophrenia. So there were people who were receiving services and yeah, she called it profoundly ill, and studied them over a period of 32 years. And there was 262 people in the study. So what they were looking for they were looking to see if how people recovered with or without clinical supports. So what they have found, and I actually want to read this. um, so the findings from the it happened in Vermont cohort drawn from the most chronically mentally ill, the lowest third of the hospital, revealed that over one half of these once profoundly ill, long stay patients had achieved a much higher level of functioning than had been predicted by our own research team during the early days of the patient's community tenure. Their achievement is even more remarkable given their original levels of chronicity. Um, yeah, so it was a fascinating study, and there's actually been more than just this. There has been 5 studies over the period of the last 50 years around people who have had profound illness. So the research says that people get better even if they don't have the medical supports that we think they need to have. So, for the purposes of this study, to meet the criteria, people had to meet 4 of 6 criteria that I'll tell you. So, Number one was no current sign or psychiatric symptoms, signs of psychiatric symptoms. Number two is living independently in the community. Number three was stable source of income. And number four was enduring supportive human relationships. Number five was no current medication. And number six was an appearance such that nobody would know that the person had been in the hospital. So what they found is 68% of people completely or made significant gains in psychiatric status and social functioning. 34% fully recovered and 34% improved significantly. So that's pretty huge, I think. Um, any thoughts about that? Yeah, Wendy's typing. Yeah. Oh, multiple attendees. Why didn't we hear more about that at the time? I don't know, actually. You can actually, maybe Matt, you could Google that, like Courtney Harding longitudinal study, and you can actually see the research study. It's online, and you can read the whole thing. Oh, you have it on there. Great, thank you, thank you, thank you. Great to see. Never give up hope in people's abilities. Thank you. People can and do recover. Amazing. So yeah, I think this is significant, and I think I think everyone should know about this study. And again, it wasn't just her study. There was a few other ones. And if you go to the National Empowerment website, they have an article about it, and there was three other studies as well. So and it mentions those on that website. Um, Let me see. It's called People Can Recover from Mental Illness by Dan Fisher and Lori Ann Ahern. I don't know how to say her name. It's a national empowerment article. So there we go. So definition of recovery. Um, this is Bill Anthony, who is one of the founders of PSR, and I like his definition of recovery. I'll just read it and then I'll say a bit more. So, a deeply personal, unique process of changing one's attitudes, feelings, or values, feelings, goals, skills, and/or roles. It's a way of living a satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life, even with limitations. Recovery involves the development of new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond the catastrophic effects of mental illness. And then this is Pat Deegan quote. The goal of recovery is not to become normal. The goal is to embrace the human vocation of becoming more deeply, more fully human. I think those are both very powerful. There's talk these days that some people aren't loving the term recovery, and it's kind of funny because I feel like now we're at an age, a time where everyone's accepting the word recovery, and now there's some movement that people want to change that again. So, and I think that's just part of the way things evolve. Um, but some people are saying that the word recovery, lots of people don't have a real sense of well-being to start with. So recovery, the if you look at the semantics of the word, it kind of means recovering what was lost. But now there's a lot of talk about how it's like a journey of healing, that maybe even that well-being was never even established in one's life, and it's just healing from that to become more deeply, more fully human. I like that. So then we're gonna switch gears. Before I kind of end that piece, does anyone have anything you want to say about that history piece? I think people misinterpret recovery as meaning no longer having a mental illness or taking meds. Yeah. And I think definitely, like we've seen in the study, some people's experience could very well be that they don't have to take meds. But I think I really like Pat Deegan's definition. It's about being fully human, and feeling connected within the world that we live in. So thank you. Anyone else have anything? I see Wendy's typing. Um, Vicky says, I hope the recovery definition that you shared will be available later. Great to share them with clients. Yeah, I think Matt said that the slide deck will be on the website. And then as well, if you just Google anything, Pat Deegan, she has some really great information. There's an article called Recovery as a Journey of the Heart, and that is a fantastic article. It's also available as a movie, a little video of her speaking. Um, so that's, available too. So Wendy says, recovery history piece, thank you. It's so important, and I learned something new. Thank you, Wendy. Um, Good. Okay, so let's move to worldview. So, what is worldview? Oh, too bad that was up there because I'd ask you, but the answer is right there. So, Mm. So worldview is the overall perspective from which one sees and interprets the world, and it's a collection of beliefs about life and the universe held by an individual or a group. I just noticed I have two bullets there, but whatever. Thank you for having grace for that. So every person carries in his head a mental model of the world, a subjective representation of external reality, and that's Alan Toffler. Um, Anyone have any comments about worldview, about what worldview means to you? Multiple attendees are typing. I love this topic. I feel like this topic is relevant for everywhere. So when Helen says our personal perception of the world, Wendy says just that it's so important to recognize and validate different ones. Thank you. We've got a couple more people typing. Ray says everyone has one. Those who don't realize they have one are unable to understand others. Thank you. And Helen says again, validation critical. And yes, Wendy. So it varies based on where you come from. Yes, for sure. I'll take a couple more. And who you come from too. Yes. Thanks, Matt. For example, culture, countries, etc., or your life experiences. Yes. Thank you. Um, So, yes. Oh, we've got a couple more people typing. So everything that was just said, and it's possible to expand your worldview. Yes. And we were all connected. Yes. Thank you. So this is just a few examples. Worldview is so complex and so many things make up our worldviews. So, but this is just a few things. So our worldview is composed of all this and more. So the city we grew up in, did we grow up in a rural city or did we grow up in the community or in the country? Our cultural background, our religious background, family and birth order in our family. I've heard Gabor Mate actually speaks a lot about that, and he speaks a lot about attachment and different things. And I heard him say once that um, siblings, so kids who grow up in the same home have different parents because we parent our children a little different. And now that I have two, I see how sometimes I'm different with each of them. So even if we come from the same family, we still have different experiences within that family. Um, our family's socioeconomic position, our experiences of death. Have we experienced abuse or bullying in our life? What access to media have we had? What books have we read? What type of education we've had? Our experience in the workforce, what we believe about wellness and recovery. One thing that isn't on there is trauma, like our experience with trauma, our experience with many things. So all of these things affect how we see the world. Um, so sometimes our worldview gets in the way. Um, so if we all have a different worldview, and sometimes it's hard I think in general, unless we've had a moment where we realize that everyone has a powerful worldview that is grounded in reality for them, we can sometimes think that our worldview is the right worldview. But we know that everything is subjective. So all of our experiences are subjective. We interpret them different ways. So if we perceive the world through our worldview, basically it's our lens through which we see the world, then we interact with the world through that lens. So we interpret stimulus that comes our way through the filter of our worldview. Our perception comes from the subjective knowledge we've gained through life. Um, so what do we have there? Oh, okay, that's not around the topic. Okay, yeah, so it can be really tricky because we start to see the world that way, but everyone has their equally strong beliefs based on their experiences. And that's where a lot of conflict can come in. Okay, so Tyler has a comment. I just wanted to add that on our natural and innate barriers, struggles through communication also affect our ability to obtain, retain some of these views. So our natural barriers and struggles, yes, yes, thank you. That's a really good point. So our ability to communicate affects, yeah, thank you for that. Um, so these are a couple quotes. A worldview is a way of viewing or interpreting all of reality. It's an interpretive framework through which or by which one makes sense of the data of life in the world. So it helps us to make sense of what we see and what makes sense of what comes our way. So, a worldview is a conceptual scheme by which we consciously or unconsciously place or fit everything we believe and by which we interpret and judge reality. So, it's the framework for understanding and interacting with the world. So, autopilot. So sometimes we live on autopilot. So Alan Toffler compares our worldview to a giant filing cabinet. So we have this filing cabinet and we file things in it. And even though we're not thinking about them all the time, they're in there and they, make us who. Um, so what can happen is we end up living on autopilot. We don't think about all those files that are in that filing cabinet that just randomly come out from time to time. We experience it can be a reaction to something that comes our way. Um, so if we had to have to stop and think about how to drive to work or how to do regular daily activities, it would be difficult to get things done. So basically, the need for autopilot, like we have to be able to do some things without thinking and learning every single time we do them. So it's a natural way that our brains work that we have to just be able to trust what we know and what we've experienced before. So if we had to learn every morning how to make coffee, oh, I need to look up my directions on how to use my coffee maker, that would be a problem. And we would live a significantly, lots of people who've experienced like short-term like brain injury and have trouble with short-term or long-term memory that can really inhibit life. So learning and knowing how to process some things is natural and it's good and it supports us to be able to make choices and decisions. Um, so living on autopilot can be a problem when we don't make the realization that everything we do and think stems from our worldview. So um, I think basically knowing that it's our tendency to live that way and our brains work that way so that we don't have to relearn everything all the time is important so that we can know when our worldview is affecting our judgment. Um, any thoughts on that? I'm going to take a sip of water. Multiple attendees are typing. um, Yeah, like if we had to learn um, how to use our phones all the time. Okay, so Paula says, kind of like CBT, faulty assumptions and distorted thinking. Can you expand on that a little bit? Wendy's typing. So it makes me think of mindfulness and checking in with oneself through rap. Yes, definitely. And mindfulness is coming. Thank you, Wendy. And rap can, I'm glad you brought up rap because I feel like rap is really an important tool for everyone. And I don't think rap needs to be just used with people who are in the mental health system. I'm actually right now working at bringing it to, some community agencies, including a police department, which I'm excited about. But it's basically a tool to learn self awareness and mindfulness because sometimes in life we don't know this whole thing is going on and we need a tool to be able to learn mindfulness because it can be a big concept to try to understand. So Paula says some of us have cognitive distortions, faulty assumptions that skew our worldview, and this can affect recovery if we don't look at them and challenge them. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Oh, Rebecca, you can hear me. Thank you. Oh, gee. Um, Thank you. Okay. So living, okay. Now Helen says, good point. Rap can be used in any situation. It's much broader than mental health. Definitely. I believe that fully. Um, and Paula says, absolutely. And there's two more people typing. I'll take these two and then we'll move to the next slide. Okay, so Tyler says, from the perspective of employment coaching, it is difficult to help my clients make career decisions when they are not aware of their own wants. Yes, self awareness can help my clients make an active decision. Thank you. That is a really good point. When you don't know what you want, that is a problem, and that definitely affects our self-determination. And the challenge piece, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, is how do we support people to find that fire within without advising and giving too much support. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So that's a great point. So we have, I can't say your name, Burhane. I think it means that we put our worldviews aside and make decisions based on what it is now. Yes, thank you. And then Vicky says, can you please repeat your statement? RAP is a tool. So thank you. RAP can, I think, um, the word mindfulness gets thrown around a lot and it means different things to different people. Some people associate mindfulness with meditation. Some people like ascribe to the more Eastern view of mindfulness. I think that it's both and. I think of a broad like whatever it means to you, it means to you. I really love if anyone knows Ellen Langer. She is a doctor at Harvard, and she wrote a book called Mindfulness. And her definition is actively noticing things. And I find that really powerful. So RAP um, really is a great jumping off point to learn self-awareness and mindfulness because we start looking at how are we feeling, what choices am I making on a daily basis, and how is it affecting my body, how is it affecting my mind, how is it affecting how I'm feeling, and how does it either make me feel worse or better. So I feel like it helps us to become more actively aware of what's going on and how our choices are affecting us. So I see RAP as a tool, a mindfulness tool. So I hope that answers your question, Vicky. Okay, so this is something I often talk about, and I call it little J and big J judgments. So I think that, there's all this talk about being non-judgmental. We're going to be non-judgmental. I think that it's almost impossible to be non-judgmental because of all that other stuff, our worldview, um, living on autopilot, naturally making these choices that come up. Like if we're, um, yeah, well, I have it right there. So a little J judgment is making a choice quickly about things um, like how to get to somewhere. Like if you have to learn and search, in your Google Maps how to get home every day from work, that's going to be a problem, right? Or how to make coffee or what to do when you spilled water on your computer. I put that one on there because I've done it 3 times online, and now I just very quickly know what to do. So those are what I call little J judgments, and we need to be able to do that, and that's how our brain naturally works. Um, where it is, oh, Vicky has a question. Self-awareness, yes. Self-awareness. Thank you, Vicky. Or Wendy. Self-awareness is the other piece. Anyway, so big J judgments are what how I define as broad sweeping judgments where we fill in the narratives about what we don't know, and we make assumptions. So that's a big J judgment. So our brains naturally make judgments. The little J judgments are normal and good and okay. It's natural for us to make big J judgments, the broad sweeping judgments where we judge other people, or we say, this idea is, not right. My idea is right. I'm right. You're wrong. I don't know if any of you are following what's happening in the U.S. right now. I'm certainly tied to it because my husband's American, but all that political stuff, oh my goodness, like that's all that stuff is big J sweeping judgments that go on. Um, so what do we do with that? And I think someone brought up the point, like knowing our worldview helps us to realize when we're making those broad sweeping judgments. I had an opportunity in September to hear Brene Brown. I don't know if anyone's heard of Brene Brown. She does wonderful work on the study of vulnerability and shame and wholeheartedness and all that. And I had the opportunity to speak at her book launch. She has a new book out called Rising Strong, very good book. Um, and she told a story, and I'm sure she wouldn't mind if well, I can't really ask her, but anyway, I'm going to tell the story. She talked about how one time she was, because she works as a professor at a university, and she was talking about how she was in a meeting and um, shared an idea that she had with her team. And there was one woman who kind of made a face when she was talking, and right away, Brene went, "Oh my goodness, she doesn't like my idea. She doesn't like me." Went to that place because we fill in the blanks, we fill in the narratives when we don't know what's going on. And she went home that day. Actually, she spoke to the woman again after and brought it up again, and she again made a face and kind of wiggled funny and looked uncomfortable. And Brene, um, went home that night and she just couldn't stop worrying about it. And I don't know about you, but I have many times had very restless, anxious nights because I'm worried about what other people think. And she had and she's so vulnerable, and she'll just share that she had this moment. And I'm like, but you're Brene Brown. But anyway, so she has moments like that too. So the next day, she was like, and this is something that we would even talk about in RAP. Like, if you're feeling anxious, we want to create an action plan to deal with that anxiety. So she was like, okay, I need to go talk to this woman. So she goes, knocks on the door to her office. This is the next day. And the woman invites her in. And she's like, yeah, so I was thinking about the meeting we had yesterday, and I brought up a certain point, and I noticed you kind of moved funny and made a face. So I just thought, it'd be good to talk about that. I'd like to hear what you think, and if maybe you have different ideas or whatever. And the woman goes, well, actually, I took a Zumba class a couple days ago, and I really put my back out, so I've been in a lot of pain. And I just was like, wow, that is such a great story, because right away we fill in all this blanks, we fill in the narrative and assume that she's thinking something that clearly she wasn't. So I love that story. Anyway, um, so mindfulness. So mindfulness, and I already mentioned this. Ellen Langer defines mindfulness as the act. I actually should say the actively noticing things instead of the act of noticing, because the word active is really important. And she often says, like, go home and and learn 3 new things about your partner or someone that you're close with. Go home and try to learn something new, or be in a space that you're in all the time and notice something different that you maybe haven't noticed before. Or if you're walking down the street that you walk down every single day, try to notice something different. So that's how she defines it. And that brings us into a state of being feeling present. So we're mindful and aware. And I love that. I love that state. Um, so since the state of being 100% non-judgmental is close to impossible, we can strive to be mindful when we find ourselves making judgments about others. So this is the piece about mindfulness and worldview, and especially when we're working with people and things come up for us, that we start to realize I'm making a judgment here based on my worldview, so I'm going to stop and notice it. So it's not to say that we can't always prevent those judgments from happening, but we can be more aware of when it's happening. So as I become more aware and present, I can start to notice when I'm making those quick judgments and then challenge them within myself. So that's how I think mindfulness fits in so well with uh, yeah, with our worldview. So let's see if there's any comments. So um, Paula says this is really important to remember. Anyone else have any comments about this, about mindfulness, worldview, any of that stuff? Wendy's typing multiple. I love this topic. We could seriously talk about this for like 4 days, I think. Are you going to mention the article about holding space? Which article are you talking about? Can you post about it? Because I am not sure. Um, who wrote the article? And did I post it? I don't even know. Critical to the moment with mindfulness, love the connection to action. Thank you. You posted it on Facebook. Oh, hmm. I posted that days ago, and I post a lot, so I don't know if I can find it. But yes, holding that is, I know which one you're talking about, Wendy, and maybe I'll see if I can find it later. I don't know if I can include that. So Tyler says Steve Miller, creator of Implicit Career Search, speaks about making decisions from essence, which is similar to making decisions with mindfulness from a place of authenticity. Thank you. I'm going to look him up. Implicit Career Search. That's great. Oh, well, Wendy, if you can find it, like find it and post the link there. Rebecca Rebecca says, I really like the idea of noticing things, which leads to being present. And Rebecca, it's a different Steve Miller, right? I think so. I know Rebecca. That's funny. There you go. There's the article Wendy's talking about. It's a fantastic article about what it means to hold space when we're supporting someone. Um, one other thing about mindfulness that I thought I'd bring up, I'm mentioning all these people, and I like, and that's because all of their work, and I listened to Parker J. Palmer, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit. I was listening to a webinar or a podcast last night, and he talked about how we sit on the shoulders of the greats. And I just feel like there's so many people who have really impacted what I know and what I've learned, and I've like really learned from them. So I feel like I'm really using their material right now. So anyway, one of the people that really influences me in my thinking is Stephen Covey. Even though he writes for business, he has some really powerful ideas about all of this stuff. One of his books, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about worldview and he talks about paradigm shifts. And I love the idea of a paradigm shift. And I think the recovery movement that we're talking about is basically a paradigm shift. And what I mean by that is a way of looking at the world. We have a certain grid that we look at the world, and we can actually pick up that grid and move it and see the world different. And then it kind of changes everything. Um, I love movies too, and kind of an example of that, I suppose, is The Matrix. If anyone watches The Matrix, even though it's kind of a dark movie, it's an example of a paradigm shift. So his work is really really amazing, and he talks. Maybe I'll tell the story. I'll tell the story. He tells a story about a paradigm shift in relation to what we're talking about here, worldview and mindfulness and all that stuff. Um, he was riding a bus, and some of you may have heard this story already. He was riding a bus in a busy city, and it was like the time of the day where everybody traveled to and from school, work. So everyone's in suits, and it's kind of not necessarily the time when there's a lot of kids, crying on the buses and stuff. So it's a different kind of time of the day. So he's riding on the bus and sitting there. Everyone's got their newspaper out and they're reading the newspaper, just trying to relax after work. And then this guy comes on. This man comes on with his two kids, and the man is zoned out. He's just like zoned out, not paying attention to his kids. And the kids start like just acting wild. They're little, and they're like running around, they're bothering people, they're, you know, knocking people, hitting people, and the dad's not even noticing. So everyone else on the bus totally notices. And I personally have little kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. And my 3-year-old I call Spicy, and she causes a lot of um, commotion sometimes when we're out in public. So I'm sensitive to this, that sometimes, this kind of judgment can come up really quickly around parents. So that's what was going on the bus, and all the people riding the bus are just kind of looking at him thinking, wow, you're a terrible parent. So Stephen Covey decides to say something. So he's like, I need to stick up for these people on the bus because we need to get these kids in order. So he looks at the guy and he says, I don't know if you noticed, but your kids are really bothering the other passengers on the bus. And the guy looks up and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We just left the hospital where their mother just passed away, and none of us know how to deal with it." It's like, that's clearly a huge paradigm shift where all of a sudden you realize there's so much going on that we don't see. And again, we fill in the blanks. We go, "Oh, well, this person, is just a bad parent. He needs to smarten up." And where there's lots of times so much more going on than we can see. So that's part of the mindfulness piece, to just be aware of, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We don't know what's all underneath that for someone. So Rebecca says spicy is in she adds flavor. She certainly adds flavor, my little one. So any other thoughts about that before we move on to the next piece, which is self-determination? Oh, and we have 20. Oh man, I gotta hurry up a little bit. Okay, so Helen's typing. Oh, maybe she's not. Okay, so self-determination. We're going to move on to this piece. So self-determination is, how do we support others in their journey? Um, so the definition of self-determination is the power or ability to make a decision for oneself without influence from the outside. So number 2 definition is within government, politics, and diplomacy, the right of a nation or people to determine its own form of government without the influence from outside. And we all know that self-determination is something we really encourage within the system and within our services of care, that we really want to support people in their journey of self-determination. I think sometimes we are not really sure how to do that, and that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the webinar. Um, one of my someone I really look up to is Parker J. Palmer, and he wrote a book called A Hidden Wholeness. And one of his influencers is also Thomas Merton. So those are two great people to look at. A Hidden Wholeness is a fantastic book, and I really recommend it for anyone who is working with people in any capacity. So this is a quote from him. When you speak to me about your deepest questions, you do not want to be fixed or saved. You want to be seen and heard and have your truth acknowledged and honored. That's really powerful. So, in our culture, there's a strong tendency to look at others, experts, to fix us or give us answers and advice. Society tends to focus on problems rather than strengths, and problems need a solution. So, we have a let's fix this mentality a lot of time. So, who else do we look to fix our glaring problems? We look at experts to do this. So, here's a thought: if you're an expert on yourself, and what if everyone you know is also an expert on themselves? What happens in that situation? We have a cultural paradigm shift if we start to see everyone as an expert on themselves. And it can be really, really challenging to support someone to trust their inner expert and their inner teacher, especially when we want to look to others outside of ourselves to fix us. And yeah, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. This kind of, yeah, so the clinician's illusion, this is something I wanted to talk about a little bit. And it is a term that was coined by Cohen and Cohen in 1984. And Courtney Harding uses this, kind of used this term and made it famous. So basically, it's the clinician sample is biased towards cases of long duration, since the probability of that case will appear in a prevalence sample uh, is proportional to its duration, hence the clinician's illusion. So basically, what it means is when we are always seeing people that need a lot of support and have a hard time breaking out of the system, we start to think that that's the case for everybody. So if if we're seeing people who are always involved in the system and have a hard time leaving, we're not seeing the people, we're not working with the people who aren't using the system at all, or maybe they use it for a time and then they go off and do their own thing. So we're not seeing that. So we start to have a bias that we think people won't ever get better. And it's important to know that that happens. I know I worked at Crest, at a Crest facility, a short stay psychiatric facility, years ago, and we only ever saw people when they were sick. So that's how, and it's just a human, it's a worldview thing. If we only see people when they're sick, we start to think that's the way they are, and we start to not know. We don't know, and we fill in the blanks about other people who we don't see. So that I think it's important to mention that. Okay, so 4 steps to becoming a radical advocate of self-determination. So, um, advice versus support. Um, and that one is tricky. And um, I think language is really important. And I haven't talked about language yet, but language is so significant in all of this because the words we choose to say really reflect um, how much hope, how much trust, and how much we believe in people. And one word that I have learned to kind of take out of my vocabulary is help, the word help, because helping kind of creates a bit of a hierarchy, that there's someone up here and there's someone up here who needs to be brought up to that level. You know what I mean? Whereas using the word support is like you are the main person, and I'm here to be there if you need support, and I'm gonna wait for you to ask me if you need the support, and then I'll step in and support you. But I trust and believe that you have the inner resources that you can do this, and I'll be here to support you if you need it. So that kind of a shift. It's a paradigm shift for me in the way I look at service. And we tend to get into this field. What I've been actually really honored to offer RAP facilitator training for peers and clinicians all over. I've had the opportunity to do it all over Western Canada and into the United States, and I really feel that everyone who gets into this field for a reason. that we all have had a personal experience with mental health issues in some form or another. So we tend to get into the field because we want to help, we want to give back. And there is a tendency when we're motivated by that that we can lean a little bit towards over helping and essentially kind of taking away from someone else's self determination. So the mindfulness piece fits in here when we start to realize that we're over helping versus um, being that support to encourage someone in their journey of self determination. So Tyler says, we have an entire reality TV industry where there are competitions based on being the most beautiful person, best entertainer, best chef, or best most important person. And then he lists a bunch. This can adjust our perspectives on achieving goals. I deal with a lot of people who get anxiety because they feel unaccomplished as a result of seeing others people heavily edited lives, achievements, social media, providing them with a singular biased perspective of others. Really good point. Really, really good point. And in the day of Facebook and Instagram, people curate their lives for others to see, so we don't see um, full reality. And that's a really good point. That can be a really hard cultural thing to work against. Um, so my next point is letting go of our need to own an outcome and holding the system's need for outcomes loosely. And this one, this one is tricky because most of us within the field, we have to prove our outcomes. So we have to say, well, this is working because so and so met this goal. That type of thing is and it's important because we want to prove that services work. We want them to be evidence based. We want to be able to receive funding so that we can offer the service. So the outcomes piece is important. And what I mean by holding it loosely is to step back and still allow people to go through that process of discovery and discovering what they need for themselves, what's part of their self determination piece, and how am I influencing it? Am I influencing it in any way so that we can say that we've met an outcome? And that can be really tricky. So it means kind of sitting with some discomfort around that because we want to know that we're making a difference because we like I said, if we come into this field to help and to make a difference, we want to see that help working. So it's hard to step back and say I am going to be a support for this person, but we know all change comes from within. So, how do we support someone to find that fire within them so that they can change versus me offering advice that really ultimately becomes about me versus them? Because my perspective, my worldview is so different. What if they have totally different beliefs than I do? Um, so Liz says a focus on outcomes is really powerful if used intentionally through a client-focused approach. That's good. What does self-determination look like for them? However, the current trends toward measuring outcomes has helped slide our sector into one that is focused on global outcomes that, from my experience, has resulted in many practitioners giving lip service to client-identified outcomes and becoming more service-driven. SMART goals are then focused on what services we offer and intended outcomes of the service instead of discovering the impact that the individual is seeking. That's a great point, Liz. And I think you're right. Like, and that's what I mean about holding the outcomes loosely is outcomes are important and we all want to know that things are happening for us. So it is important. But yeah, I had the opportunity in my job before that I got to sit in on recovery planning meetings where people created goals. And some of the goals, sometimes they would come to the client would come to a meeting and the clinician would already have the goals written out for them. And they were things like riding the bus, stuff like that, which maybe that is important to them. But I would want to explore what's underneath that. Why do you want to ride the bus? What are you wanting community? How do you identify what do you really want? What do you want to focus on? How do you want to feel? How do you want to feel is something we don't talk about enough in our culture. is how do you want to feel every day? What do you want to do to make you feel good? We all want to feel good. So what is it that will support you to feel good, and how do we work towards how do you work towards meeting that, and how can I support you in your journey? So um, yeah, so learning to sit with our own discomfort is big. Facilitating a dialogue with people we support about finding their why. Pat Deegan said something, I heard her, a video with her recently where she says, you can't organize a recovery around a vacuum. We need to find purpose and drive. So just simply creating goals to meet the goals for outcomes purposes, we need to help people find their support people. I correct myself. Support people to find their purpose and drive. Like what's driving you? What do you want in life? You can if you can do whatever you want to do, what would you do? And sometimes we put limits on people because we think, oh, you know, you have this diagnosis, you have this problem, you have all these barriers. So think more realistically. Well, Pat Deegan got a doctorate degree. Lots of people go back to school and do things. So for us to say, no, you know, think more realistically, maybe make your goal a little easier to attain. I think I know for myself, I've made heaps of goals that were really high, and I figure out for myself when I don't when it doesn't light me up anymore, and I'll say no, and then I'll find something else. So having someone say that's not a good goal doesn't help. It's like we need to discover that for ourselves. And I think we need to support people in the same way that we want to receive that kind of support. Um, oh, I'm missing a bunch of things here. Um, Anyway, so support versus help, and I talked about this already a little bit. So support the person's inner teacher expert and their resilience. Um, People have gotten to the place where we see them and we support them, so they have resilience. They have resilience because they've gotten to that peace. Celebrating, we don't celebrate enough in our culture. So celebrating that resilience. How did you get here? What did you do to get to the place that you're here today? And supporting that. And sometimes I worked with someone recently who was struggling with even finding that she had hope for anything. So I asked her a whole bunch of questions. Well, what drove you to come to this event that you're at today? And like asking questions so that people can reflect on and discover what's already in there, because there's something in there. Sometimes we're not aware of what's in there, but we need someone to shine a light on what we see so that we can discover what is already there. And if we just go and name it, it kind of steals from that person, because the process of discovery is so important in finding that purpose and drive. I often like to talk about the Wizard of Oz, and I realize I'm totally running out of time. I thought I would end early, and clearly I have a lot to say. So I love to talk about the Wizard of Oz because everyone knows, you know, the Tin Man, the lion and the scarecrow and Dorothy. They're on this mission to find the things that they feel they're missing in their lives, and they go on this journey. And throughout the journey, they actually discover that they have, well, they don't discover until the end, but we see as viewers of the adventure, we see that they have all these things already that they're searching to get from this external person, the wizard, who turns out to be a croc. So but the process of the journey is what unearths those qualities within them. So sometimes we want to like take away someone's pain. We want to support them, and we want to, you know, yeah. But the process of going through that pain, going through that discomfort, is what unearths all those amazing qualities within us. So as a support person, we want to um, create environments where people have that opportunity to discover in a safe way, because obviously there's points when we need to intervene. But how do we create an environment where people are allowed to make mistakes, where people are allowed to have adventures, that draw out the strongest parts of our character. And I know for me, the times in my life that have been the hardest are the things where I've learned the most. Um, anyway, so I can go on about that. So sometimes the expert we are gets lost in the muck and mire. So we forget our who we lose sight of who we are. And support is about shining a light on someone's strengths, being an encouragement rather than fixing or doing things for someone. Thoughts about that? Okay. Um, Liz says, what is it about reining in someone's goals to be realistic? Again, this goes back to our needs to see an achievable goal. I love it when someone has a broad vision as it provides so much insight into what matters. Using the question, what will be different for you? Um, what will be different if you have that in your life? What will you be doing, feeling, thinking? It's so rich. Achievable goals can then easily flow, or that is my experience. Definitely. I also, another person that's significant in my thinking is someone named Danielle Laporte, and she's not in the mental health system at all, but she writes a book called Desire Map. And I also, part of my work is I deliver those workshops. And I definitely recommend. She's a little bit harsh, so if you get her book, just know that she swears a little. That's okay. But she talks about how the end goal. Sometimes we work so much towards the end goal, but figuring out what is it that you want to feel and you think that you'll feel at that end goal, what is that? And let's name it. Let's name it as a feeling. So for me, um, I might name that, sure, I want to make a certain amount of money. I want to live in a house. I want to be able to travel, all that kind of stuff. Maybe sometimes if you get to that piece where you finally get the big house or whatever, what happens when it becomes normal? So then you want to look at what is the feeling behind it. So for me, one of my uh, core desired feelings, we call it, is I want to feel freedom. So then if people start to identify, yes, I want to feel freedom, I want to feel connection, and that's what's underneath those big goals, then we can start to make choices every day to feel that way every day, which is so powerful. And life then can be rich every single day, not just when we meet that end goal. So I have a couple. I'm actually, oh, we're almost at the end and good. So I have two little quotes or stories that I want to talk about before we end. This one is an illustration of the point of support. And I don't think it's true. It's just a little story that I found on the internet, but I think it's got a really profound message. So, a man found a cocoon of a butterfly. One day, a small opening appeared. He sat and watched the butterfly for several hours as it struggled to force its body through that little hole. Then it seemed to stop making any progress. As it appeared as if it had gotten as far as it could and it could go no farther. Then the man decided to help the butterfly, so he took a pair of scissors and snipped off the remaining bit of the cocoon. The butterfly then emerged easily, but it had a swollen body and small, shriveled wings. The man continued to watch the butterfly because he expected that at any moment the wings would enlarge and expand to be able to support the body, which would contract in time. Neither happened. In fact, the butterfly spent the rest of its life crawling around with a swollen body and shriveled wings. It was never able to fly. What this man, in his kindness and haste, did not understand was that the restricting cocoon and the struggle required for the butterfly to get through the tiny opening were nature's way of forcing fluid from the body of the butterfly into his wings so that it could be ready for flight once it achieved its freedom from the cocoon. So that's oh, it makes me almost want to cry. That's a really powerful, um, uh, what's the word? Oh geez, I forgot the word. A metaphor. Thank you. A metaphor for what happens when we overhelp and when we become mindful of our desire to overhelp and support the outcome. And it all comes from a good place. It all comes from a place that we want to make a difference. And I think sometimes it can feel weird to step back a little bit and support self-determination because we feel like we're not doing enough. Um, but that's really what our role is to be in the background, kind of like you know, a really, oh no, I could go on. I'm going to stop myself. I'm going to come. One more little story, and I got to find it here. Another Parker J. Palmer quote, and I think it's a great place to end. Um, it's again from the book A Hidden Wholeness. Um, Here goes. In the face of our deepest questions, the kind we are invited to explore in circles of trust. He calls circles of trust an open space where you can just be with people. Um, our habit of advising each other reveals its shadow side. If the shadow could speak its logic, I think it would say something like this: if you take my advice, you'll surely solve your problem. If you take my advice but fail to solve your problem, you didn't try hard enough. If you fail to take my advice, I did the best I could, so I'm covered. No matter how things come out, I no longer need to worry about you or your vexing problem. The shadow behind the fixes we offer for issues that we cannot fix is ironically the desire to hold each other at bay. It is a strategy for abandoning each other while appearing to be concerned. Perhaps this explains why one of the most common laments of our time is that no one really sees me, hears me, or understands me. When you speak to me about your deepest questions, you do not want to be, I think I already read this one, but I'll read it again. You do not want to be fixed or saved. You want to be seen and heard, to have your truth acknowledged and honored. If you see if your problem is soul deep, your soul alone knows what you need to do about it. And my presumptuous advice will only drive your soul back into the woods. So the best service I can render when you speak to me about such a struggle is to hold you faithfully in a space where you can listen to your inner teacher. But holding you that way takes time, energy, and patience. As the minutes tick by with no outward sign that anything is happening for you, I start to feel anxious, useless, and foolish. And I start to think about all the other things I have to do instead of keeping that space between us open for you to hear your soul. I fill it up with advice, not so much to meet your needs as to my anxiety and get on with my life. Then I can disengage from you, a person with a troublesome problem, while saying to myself, I tried to help. I walk away feeling virtuous. You are left feeling unseen and unheard. So that's a good quote. So, what we want is to create spaces and hold space for people to go through the struggles they need to go through and to create the quote is from Parker J. Palmer's book, A Hidden Wholeness. And I recommend buying it. You can get it on Amazon. Um, Yeah, so we want to create a space for people to go through what they need to go through to find that inner expert. And that means sometimes it takes longer. And in a culture where everything's fast, 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 quick, 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 it means stepping back and just holding space. And holding space sometimes means clearing out other things, which would be like giving advice and the pressure and all that kind of stuff. So how do we do that? How do we in our work hold that space for people to find that inner teacher? So the shift is simple but radical. It involves understanding a history of where we've come from, understanding our worldview and biases and how they affect the service we provide, and knowing what self-determination is and becoming mindful about the role our worldview plays in supporting others. And then the last thing in conclusion is the importance of sitting with the discomfort that might come from holding back help and making space for the person to choose their own outcome. So I think we're done. I don't know. I've run out of time for people to comment. I don't know if we can go over, but
I think if people have to go, we respect that, and folks have been with us for 90 minutes, and thank you so much. But maybe if we do have 5 or 10 minutes, Jen, if you're comfortable, and folks
yeah,
have any burning comments or questions, we can
yeah,
we'll maybe we'll close the session here formally in terms of recording, but we can stick around, so to speak, in the cyber room, do a little chatting that way, and then we'll depart. Tyler, to your question, yes, the session is recorded and it's available like all our other archive sessions on the website www.psyrehab.ca/workshops, and you can just peruse all our archive sessions. It's also available on our YouTube channel, BC PSR Advanced Practice. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to close the recording. People are free to depart as you need, but if you have any questions, feel free.